So the Nintendo Switch 2 is finally here. I want to give you guys my honest review here in this video. It's been out since June 5th. I've been playing with it for just about a week, I guess, at the time of recording this. No, I was not sent one. Sometimes people assume if you're a content creator of any sort, you probably were sent something. No, I paid for this with my own money, and I've been really enjoying this thing. So I want to give you guys as much information, as thorough of a review as possible. I'm going to try not to miss anything, but if you have any questions that are not answered throughout this video, leave them in the comment section. I'll do my very best to answer them, and make sure you guys hit that like button if you enjoy this kind of content. Subscribe for more. We have a lot of Nintendo Switch 2 content, from guides and walkthroughs, tutorials, gameplays. I mean, you name it, we got it. And if there's anything else you'd like to see, let me know. All right, let's go ahead and jump straight into this. So before I get into my experience with this console, let's talk about some raw specs. First, let's show you guys a comparison against a Switch OLED. You can see exactly how it looks compared to the Switch OLED. I mean, it is significantly bigger. The Switch OLED looks dinky, and even more so against the Switch Lite. So if I throw up the Switch Lite, you guys can see how that compares. I mean, it's a big console, and yet it somehow feels more slim and sleek in the hands, but it's big. It's a wide screen. It's a lot bigger. The Joy-Cons are bigger, and we're going to talk about those details right now. So let's go into the actual fact sheet, if you will, just so you can know what's this thing kind of packing, if you will. So its approximate weight is about 1.18 pounds when you have the Joy-Con 2 controllers attached. It has a 7.9-inch wide color gamut LCD screen. I'm willing to bet it's probably an IPS screen because of how color accurate it is, but that's just speculation on my part. It's a 1080p screen, so the original Switch was 720. It supports HDR10. It has variable refresh rate on handheld mode for up to 120 hertz. It has a custom processor made by NVIDIA. We don't really know much beyond that about the processor. It has 250 gigs of internal storage. A little bit of a portion of that is used and reserved by the system, but not too much, so you get most of it. So I mean, again, way more space. It has wireless LAN, Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth, and TV mode, of course, with the dock. The dock has a built-in LAN port. Video output, it outputs at 4K resolution, 60 FPS in TV mode. It supports 120 FPS at 1080p or 1440p resolutions. Again, supports HDR10 in TV mode as well, and all that good stuff. Audio output, it has supports linear PCM output 5.1 channel output via HDMI connector in TV mode. Surround sound effect can be applied when outputting the headphones or the built-in to the built-in speaker. Surround sound effect when outputting to the built-in speaker requires a system update, it says. It has stereo speakers. The independent enclosure structure provides natural, clear sound quality, and that's one thing I'll say. This thing gets extremely loud, way louder than you'll probably ever need it to get. The speakers in handheld mode is insanely loud. It has a built-in microphone, noise cancellation, echo cancellation, auto gain control, provides more comfortable voice chat experience. Now, from my experience, the microphone is a little bit echoey, and just how it sounds. We'll talk a little bit more, hopefully, about that in a second. It has obviously a bunch of different buttons on here, right? Kind of like your typical stuff. You got your volume rocker, you got your power button, you got your game cartridge holder thing, which we'll talk about in a second as well. It has an audio jack, 3.5 millimeter fork contact stereo mini plug. So basically your standard kind of audio jack, if you will. And that's the beauty of this thing, is it has two USB-Cs, one on the bottom, one on the top. And so you can actually, if you want, the Joy-Cons go backwards if you want. I'll talk about that in a second. So you can sort of flip which side the headphone jack is on. It's by default on the top. You cannot use your micro SD card from your previous Switch because you need a micro SD Express SD card. So again, they are SD cards, but you need a different kind of SD card because these ones read and write a lot faster, which is important for the Switch 2 and its games and the faster load times that it supports. The sensors in the console supports accelerometer, gyroscope, mouse sensors located in both Joy-Con 2 controllers, which we'll talk about in a second. There's also a brightness center located in the console, so if you want auto brightness on, you can do that as well. It has a lithium-ion battery, 5,220 is the size of that. The battery lasts, they say, approximately 2 to 6.5 hours, depending on what you're playing, which sounds about right. I would say I could get maybe 2 to 3 hours playing Mario Kart World. Yeah, it's a little bit on the lower side, but Again, we'll talk about that more in a second. And charge time's approximately 3 hours while the system is in sleep mode. So regarding the Switch 2, okay, so charging the battery, yeah, it doesn't last a super long time compared to its predecessor, but you got to understand too, you know, there's a lot going on with the HDR, the higher frame rate, the higher resolutions, 1080p, you know, obviously a more powerful CPU. All these things suck the life out of this thing, especially, you know, when you compare it to other kind of handheld PC, you know, whatever, handhelds, if you will. They're kind of similar, right? They're ballpark similar. Some of them actually last less than that, less time than that. So it kind of really depends how, you know, those are set up. But so yeah, this is kind of ballpark what you would expect for this kind of device with the kind of power it's outputting, with the kind of screen it has. Yeah, the battery is less technically than the Switch OLED, but again, this is what you would expect for what you're getting internally and, you know, screen wise and all that for the Nintendo Switch 2. So again, the screen, my experience with the screen, again, 1080p, it looks way better than the Switch, you know, original. Comparing it to the Switch OLED, obviously the OLED panel is going to be more vibrant. Some people don't like those more vibrant colors anyways. What's nice about this is it's more vibrant than the original Switch screen. The colors are very, you know, vibrant for what this is, you know, and so even though it's not OLED, you're going to get some more rich colors than you would have with the original Switch. And I think it's a nice middle ground for people who maybe don't like OLED, because yeah, believe it or not, there's a lot of people that do not like OLED because they find it too vibrant, right? And so it's a really good screen, a lot better than the Switch 1, in my opinion. And so the console itself, like I said, it's sleek. It has a kickstand on the back that's a little bit different than the Switch OLED kickstand. The Switch 1 kickstand was just like a little dinky kind of rectangular, small like side kickstand. Then they revamped it. They made sort of like this big wide piece of plastic for the Switch OLED. And they did something similar for the Nintendo Switch 2, but that whole middle piece of plastic they kind of removed. So it's just kind of like a bar of a kickstand now, which works best. I think it saves them kind of materials as well, which probably saves us as a consumer a little bit of cost. I don't know how much cost that would really save us, but some plastics being saved there. So again, it's not flimsy. It's very stiff to move up and down. So it's very sturdy is basically what I'm getting at. Your micro SD card would slot right under the kickstand there. In terms of the Joy-Cons and how these connect, way better. So on a Switch 1, it's kind of like a rail system where you slide it in the rail. This one's so much easier. So there's like a little release trigger on the back of the Nintendo Switch 2, and you push this trigger and it just pops off because these actually connect with magnets. So inside here, you can't really see it. So inside here, there's like some really strong magnets, and there's also a connector right here that your Joy-Cons basically slot into, as you can see. And the S and L buttons, or SL and SR buttons right here, these are actually metal, and so, or they're steel or whatever. And so these end up sticking to the magnets here like absolute glue. And so you just basically snap that in, and that's how easy it is. You just you can just release, put them out, put it back in, put them out, put them out. And like, that's so much quicker, so much more convenient, so much easier than the Switch 1. And the other thing about that is it's never going to come off. You can see, like, it takes a lot of force. You're not going to do it accidentally. You are not going to pull this thing off accidentally. It's not going to fall off just when you're holding it like this. If you're playing with it, it's the way it's slotted in, it's impossible. You really have to pull to kind of, again, you have to put a lot of force to snap these magnets off, but it's really good. So that's basically what the release does, like a little piece of plastic that pushes it off. And so I don't see this having any issues. Really, it works very well for what it is. And again, it's so convenient. You just slot them in, snaps in, super easy. So speaking of Joy-Cons, you can see that compared to the Switch 1 Joy-Cons, I mean, they're significantly bigger, which in my opinion is nice. The Switch 1 Joy-Cons felt a little too small. The SL and SR buttons, excuse me, are a lot bigger. They were dinky on the Switch 1. And so everything's just nicer. And then like the triggers on the back, you can see the triggers on the Switch 2 Joy-Cons, they kind of go a little bit further back. So it's a little bit easier. There's more kind of range where you can click the buttons in, and you can click the buttons pretty much anywhere that you can see here. And it clicks very well and pretty much similarly to any spot on those, you know, the L and the ZL and the R and the ZR. Again, the triggers is way better. The face buttons are bigger. They feel a little bit more, natural sized, right? Where on the Switch 1, they're a little bit more dinky. So everything's a little bit bigger. The sticks are of course, bigger as well. You can see their sticks on the Switch 1 are a lot smaller. And so they're just a little bit bigger, a little bit fuller. They're not quite as full as, like, let's say on the Pro Controller. Like, compared to the Pro Controller, they're still a little bit smaller. If I show you that kind of sort of comparison, like slightly, I'm trying to place this right. They're slightly smaller, but again, they're a lot closer to how you would imagine a thumbstick should feel like. And these feel great. They're just bigger for the hands. They're built in a way where, you know, little hands can hold them like kind of higher where more of it's sticking out, or, you know, bigger hands can kind of fill up the whole space of the Joy-Con in your palm. And so it works really well. They have HD Rumble 2. So basically HD Rumble from the Switch 1, which was, you know, using a lot of haptics, they kind of rebuilt that from the ground up, and they have that kind of housed in the very back of the Joy-Cons, or in the kind of handles of the Pro Controller. And that allows it so wherever you're kind of holding this is going to connect with your hand and create the best kind of connection to your hand for that kind of vibration sensation. And with these new HD Rumble 2s, it can go a lot softer to a lot stronger. So it actually feels really good. And I already thought the Switch 1 had great rumble, but this is definitely a lot better. By the way, if you do want to see a review for the Pro Controller, the Pro Controller 2, I think this is one of the greatest controllers ever made. They refined the Switch 1 greatly, Switch 1 Pro Controller, and this one is just like the sticks are buttery smooth. Anyways, I have a full review of that up on the channel if you guys want to check that out. Speaking of sticks, these ones are smoother than the Switch 1 as well. Switch 1 had a little bit more of a grindy feel. These kind of feel more silky, I guess is the best way to say it. I don't know about drift yet. I guess we'll have to find out how that goes. Hopefully there's no issues with that. They're not using Hall effect because, again, the magnets will kind of interfere with, you know, the actual magnets on the connection with the Switch 2, right? So yeah, that's how that works. So right here, that little hole right there is where the optical sensor is. And again, there's one on both controllers, both Joy-Cons. You can see there's optical sensors there. And that allows you to be able to play in mouse mode, which is a whole other feature that I've tried. And it works really, really well. I would highly recommend putting the actual straps on, which just kind of connect with like a little magnet as well. And so putting the wrist straps on are just way more easier as well. And the reason I say that is because they have little kind of, you know, mouse boots, if you will, which just makes it slide a little bit better. And yes, you can use it on any surface. You can use it even on your pants. I've tried it with Fortnite that added mouse controls. I've tried it with the Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour. Obviously Metroid Prime 4 is not out yet, so I can't try it with that, but I've had a good amount trying it. You can also cruise around the home menu of the Nintendo Switch 2 with you know, in mouse mode. It's really cool. It works really, really well, and I can't wait to see how, you know, games are going to utilize that, especially if we get like a Mario Maker 3, maybe a new Mario Paint. I mean, the possibilities are endless. So really excited to see how that's implemented with more games in the future, but it's a lot of fun. So when you pick up a Nintendo Switch 2, you're going to get the Nintendo Switch 2 console. You're going to get the new Joy-Cons, of course, with it. The two Joy-Con straps. You're going to get the Nintendo Switch 2 dock. You're going to get the Nintendo Switch 2 Joy-Con 2 grip. You're going to get the AC adapter, of course. You're going to get a new HDMI cable. So do not use your Switch 1 HDMI cable, because this new HDMI cable allows it so it can transfer data at higher speeds, meaning, you know, better speeds for 4K resolution, for the 120 hertz, you know, 120 FPS and stuff like that. So use the new HDMI cable and a couple things like that. So yeah, so you're pretty much getting everything that you would expect. Pretty much everything that you got with the Switch 1, except these are all Switch 2 version stuff. And like I said, you get the grip, you get everything else, which is nice. So it does not come with a charging grip, just kind of like the Switch 1. It's just a normal grip. The charging grip is sold separately if you do want that one. It would have been nice to see them include that. Maybe it costs a little bit more. I don't know. The charging grip does have these GR and GL buttons on the back, which the grip that's included does not. Again, it would have been nice to see if they would have had those kind of back buttons included with this grip. It's not included, but it's not really a huge gripe. It's just kind of more of like well, why not? Why not have it? You know, why not include that? So let's get into a little bit more of the actual system itself, hands-on, playing with it. This is all kind of, you know, what's new with the hardware, but what about how does that translate when you're actually getting hands-on? I played a few different games, of course. You know, I played the upgraded versions of both Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, which look fantastic on the Switch 2. Absolutely stunning. I've done a bunch of comparison videos of those games. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which got a free update. So there's other games that got free updates, and just kind of how we can see how the Switch 2 hardware is really kind of bringing these games to a whole other level. With Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, that's a great example because that game now runs in buttery smooth frame rate while it had some serious performance issues on the Switch 1. And, you know, that's just something that the Switch 1 wasn't really, you know, able to handle too much. Unfortunately, it had very limited specs. I remember playing Monster Hunter Rise on it. Great game, but even that game, it chugged, man. You know, it was, you were getting drops and stuff, and it was just not the smoothest experience. But the Switch 2 handles pretty much so far anything that you throw at it. Developers are extremely excited about, you know, how easy they're saying that it is to develop for this thing. There's a ton of third-party support right out of the gate. We have tons of third-party games at launch. We have many more third-party games coming, including, you know, Borderlands 4, which is a huge game coming out later on this year. So a lot of third-party support. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3+4, you know, lots of stuff. Cyberpunk 2077. Now, the thing with that is there's a whole other thing called game cards. I made a whole other video on game cards if you want to check that out. But game cards, basically, it's like a license on a cartridge, and that basically makes it so, you know, it's if developers don't want to pay for a physical cartridge, because physical cartridges actually do cost, you know, X amount of money, instead of just doing a downloadable code like so many third-party developers did on the Switch 1, they can opt for release this game key cartridge, which makes it so you can lend out the game, you can resell the game, things like that. Whereas if you did a downloadable code, it's tied to your actual console. Nintendo's first-party games, they're not doing that. Everything is completely physical on the cartridge, and some third-party companies as well. Cyberpunk 2077, whole thing is on the cartridge. It's not a game key cartridge. Now, there's a lot of the people, obviously analysts and stuff, but also some developers that have said that this thing is probably closer to an Xbox Series S in terms of power. Some people were like, oh, it's probably close to PS4. No, it's actually way closer to an Xbox Series S, which would put it kind of at the lower end of the current generation for, you know, the other consoles that are out there. Yes, it's not as powerful as an Xbox Series X, PS5, or like a, you know, $1,000, $1,500 PC, and I wouldn't expect it to be. But it's extremely powerful for what it is, and to be able to have that kind of experience also in your hands is pretty crazy, especially for this price point. Yeah, it's a lot more expensive than the Switch 1, but what you're getting out of this console is some pretty insane power, if you really kind of think about it. Now, that goes into my experience with it. I've played Mario Kart World, did a review on that if you want to know details about that. We're not really going into that. I've played, like I said, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, their updated versions, the free updates of various Switch 1 games, you know, Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, a little tiny bit of Bravely Default. I didn't get to play too much yet at the time of recording, and a few other things like that. And it's been a really just an absolute blast, an absolute pleasure to play this. The games look stunning, crisp 4K visuals overall. You know, obviously not every game is going to run at 4K, but overall, for the most part, most of these games are running, you know, 2K to 4K. The games so far at launch, I think, are pretty much all 4K in docked mode, 1080p in handheld mode. Some of them might be like 900p. I think Cyberpunk 2077 is like 900 if I remember correctly. But either way, point is, I don't have Cyberpunk 2077, just for full disclosure. But yeah, my experience with the games that I have tried has been just amazing. Everything runs smooth. The load times are really fast on this thing. The visuals, like I said, are crisp. Frame rates are buttery smooth. It's actually kind of crazy to see games like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, all these games run so smooth with such a higher frame rate than they did on the Switch 1. And that just shows you just a glimpse of the possibility that we're going to see with the Nintendo Switch 2 as developers unlock more and more of its potential. And that's how it always is, right? As developers learn about these things, and some developers did not even get dev kits until the launch. And so, you know, as we kind of go down, you know, the next year, couple years, first couple years of the launch, we're going to really see the potential of this thing unlock. Super Mario Party Jamboree is going to be using mouse controls for some new mini games. There's, like I said, a microphone built into this thing that you can use for multiple different things, which includes a new function called GameChat. I'm not going to go too much into GameChat either, because we made separate videos on all these things, and I don't want to make this video too long. But GameChat essentially allows you to chat with people online, but only specifically with friends. They have to be approved friends. You have to add your phone number to your account to be able to access it, kind of like how you would expect Discord, and it kind of almost looks like a little bit like Discord. It works well for what it is, but it's a little strange, I guess, you know, how echoey the microphone is, because it's dependent on how far, you know, the Switch 2, I guess, is from you, and if it's across the room like it is for some people, then it's kind of echoey, but it does a good job of cutting kind of like background noise and stuff because it has that, built-in sort of technology that has noise suppression, different things like that. So it works good, even though the I would say the mic quality is not, the greatest. You can also plug in USB microphones if you do want to do that. I've tested a little bit of that out. It does work. Same thing with cameras. You don't have to use the Switch 2 camera. There's other USB cameras that work with it. And actually, even Nintendo said it. They said it somewhere. I think there was like an email they emailed out that I got, and in it they're like, hey, you can use a variety of USB cameras, and you can just check if they're compatible in the system game settings, and you go test USB camera and see if it works. And a lot of them do work, and I have some third-party USB-C, and not even just USB-C. USB-C would be plugging into the Switch 2 itself, but you could also plug USB-A into the dock itself as well. And so yeah, the dock, by the way, has vents in it, making it, obviously better cooling for when you are in docked mode, because it's going to be using a little bit more power for that 4K resolution and all that. So yeah, I mean, in terms of game chat, it works really well. You could do face cam and stuff. Am I going to use it a bunch? Probably not. But again, I usually don't use game chat and even on other consoles, so that's just a me thing. Now, outside of game chat, the microphone could be used for games. So we don't have a lot of games that really utilize the microphone yet, and I hoped more games would kind of implement these features, and I'll explain why in just a second. But one of the games that we know about is Super Mario Party Jamboree. There's this game mode where you can basically shout and it does like an action on screen. That update's not out at the time of recording yet. It's a DLC. It's going to be coming out in, I think, a month, maybe 5 or 6 weeks at the time of recording this, roughly. And so, yeah, seeing that kind of, ability is kind of cool. And why do I like that? Well, I remember back on the DS, Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass, one of the things you had to do with the microphone on the DS was blow into it to blow out like these candles or whatever to solve a puzzle. And I think that's kind of cool. So, it'd be nice to see if, the next Zelda game and maybe some other games on the Nintendo Switch 2 would utilize the microphone in some way that would be unique in that way. Whether it's maybe not blowing directly into the mic for people who are playing in docked mode, but even if it's just to kind of say something out loud or whatever, yeah, maybe that could be problematic if you're, busy and around people. But I don't know, it'd just be cool to see them implement that in some way. And then also with the mouse controls, like I said. So there's a couple new features like that. People asking, what's the quote-unquote gimmicky feature, the unique feature of the Nintendo Switch 2? Well, again, they added the microphone, they added the mouse controls. There's a couple things like that. I would say it's probably akin to moving from the DS to the 3DS. The 3DS's thing is like, hey, we have a 3DS screen, right? But it was pretty much the DS, but just kind of more powerful. And that's kind of what we're seeing here, right? It's the Nintendo Switch, but it's more powerful. It has a couple new features like that that makes it unique to itself. It's not as big of a jump as going like, let's say, from like GameCube to Wii or something, right? But it's, like I said, probably on par from like going from the DS to the 3DS is what I would say. Now, this isn't really, actual, console based, but the games, in case anybody's wondering, the game cases are pretty much the same size. So you can see I have the Switch 2 version of Breath of the Wild and the Switch 1 version of Breath of the Wild. Yeah, they're pretty much the same size, except the Switch 2 one has, it's red and it has kind of like that red kind of thing at the top. And the other thing is on the Switch 1 version, it would actually just have a red spine. On the Switch 2 version, it's essentially the artwork that just kind of wraps around, which is really, really nice as well. Then, of course, inside the case kind of looks like that. Again, it's red. So you don't really see the artwork kind of come through as much as you do on the Switch version. The cartridges are also red. They're pretty much the same size. The Switch 2 cartridges, they can go into the Switch 1. For example, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the Switch 2 edition. If I pop it in the Switch 1, it'll just load the Switch 1 edition. The Switch 1 games, like I said, can go into the Switch 2. The Switch 2 games can technically go into Switch 1, but unless it's a game, like I said, Breath of the Wild, that supports a Switch 1 version, it's not going to play the game, of course. But if you do have the Switch 2 version of Breath of the Wild, assumingly Metroid Prime 4, Tears of the Kingdom, games like that, the Switch 2 version will play on the Switch 1. It'll just load the Switch 1 version of the game. Now let's talk about the UI a little bit. So the UI is pretty much the same as the Switch 1 UI. A little bit different. The icons are a little bit more kind of rounded on the corners and stuff. The UI looks a little bit more sleek, but it's essentially the same UI. as on the Switch 1, which to me is a little disappointing. Most people will be like, I don't care, you know, why try to fix what isn't broken? But I would have liked to see something a little bit more fresh, something a little bit more fun. That's one thing that I always found personally about the Switch 1 is the UI is just really boring. There's no themes. Hopefully they bring themes at a later date. As of launch, there is none. Basically, you know, no music either. When you're doing the setup, there's a bunch of background music, which is really cool. But then on the actual home menu, no music. And they say that's to kind of save, you know, system resources, which I get. But it'd be cool if there was an option to have that on or off, you know, if you want that background music. That's one thing I loved about the Wii, and the Wii U, and the 3DS, and all that. But yeah, so none of that. In terms of some other stuff, you know, the eShop works way better, way more smooth on the Switch 2. There's a little bit of stutters here and there, so it's not as smooth as it could be. I think if they would do well to just rehaul the eShop entirely and kind of, you know, redesign it maybe, because it's still not functioning like 100%, but it's light years better than the Switch 1 eShop, and for the most part, it's very, very smooth, kind of, you know, cruising through the menus and stuff like that as well. That's kind of pretty much all there really is different about the UI for the most part. You know, system settings has a couple different things in there. Like I said, the ability to kind of test your USB, you know, camera, stuff like that, which obviously you can't do on the Switch 1, but overall the UI experience is very similar to the Switch 1. So another physical component I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention earlier is the game cartridge slot. So there's kind of like this little metal thing that kind of cups over the Switch game card now when you put it in, and that just slides in very easily, by the way, and that just kind of adds a little bit of extra protection to the whole kind of game cartridge slot. So that's just kind of a nice little additional feature. Of course, you can see more vents and stuff, bigger vents on here. Like I said, USB-C on both the top and the bottom, which allows it so I could take my Joy-Cons off like this, and then I can just flip them upside down. And what this allows me to do is now it won't charge like this. Nintendo says I have this upside down. The Joy-Cons are the other way. But now what you can see is my headphone jack is technically on the bottom now because I flipped the console upside down, because technically the headphone jack's on the top. So that's one way that you can kind of reorient your Switch console in handheld mode. But again, they say that apparently it won't charge when the Joy-Con 2 controllers are on backwards. I think I learned that in Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour. I'm pretty sure. Which I think should have been bundled in, but it's only $10, but it still should have been bundled in. Okay, so I think that covers pretty much everything there is about the Nintendo Switch 2. If I forgot anything, or if you have any additional questions, let me know in the comment section below. But all in all, this thing vastly improves upon the Nintendo Switch 1. It makes what was with the Switch 1 even better. Kind of like I said, DS going into 3DS. The Joy-Cons are better. The triggers, you know, the kind of back buttons here are better. The sticks are better. They're smoother. They're larger. The screen is bigger, like an inch bigger. The sound quality in here is amazing. 1080p in handheld mode, HDR, 120 hertz support, docked mode up to 4K. 4K looks insane. The games run buttery smooth. They all runs really well. Everything loads faster. Everything runs faster, runs smoother. Mouse controls is really cool. The microphone, not used in really a lot of games right now, but again, with the addition to GameChat is nice for those who want to utilize GameChat. You can kind of video with your friends if you do have a USB camera as well, and whatnot. But again, mouse and then the microphone controls, it allows more possibilities for games in the future. I just can't wait. And the mouse controls, again, from my testing, works pretty well. It doesn't feel as good as like a normal mouse, because a normal mouse feels fuller in your hand, but feels really, really good. Overall, this thing is a massive improvement over the Switch 1. It works really well. It's very powerful for what it is. Developers are very pleased with it. I'm very pleased with it. I think this thing is going to last quite a long time for the next number of years. There's going to be a ton of third-party support. Can't wait to see, even more games that come out on this thing and how that's, unlocks the full potential of what it can do. It's just a really good device. It's sleek in the hands, even though it's bigger. Yeah, it is a little on the heavy side, admittedly. Like I said, it's over a pound, when you're holding it, with the Joy-Cons, but it's just a really good device, really fun. And if you're a Nintendo fan, you'd be crazy to skip out on this thing. All in all, I would give the Nintendo Switch 2 an overall 9.5 out of 10. It is an amazing console. Like I said, it vastly improves upon the Switch 1. And while I do have some gripes with it, I'm a little bit one of those guys that not super crazy about the UI being the same and no menu music and stuff. I'm hopeful that they'll add at least other kind of themes in the future. And either way, the experience with the games, the experience with the console, the Joy-Cons I absolutely love. A little bit uncomfortable when you're holding the Joy-Cons like this in your hand if you don't have the wrist strap on. But since the wrist straps are so easy to clip on, you just kind of go like that. That kind of makes it so it's like all flush on the side, because otherwise it's kind of like this piece of plastic here, which feels a little funky. But if you put this on, it feels flush and it feels a lot better to kind of grab onto, in my opinion. But either way, you know, that's not really a gripe. That's just kind of a little tidbit. But really works well. Again, I think this thing is amazing. It's so much fun. I'm so glad that it's finally out, and I can't wait to play all the other games that are going to be coming out for this thing. So keep locked on the channel. There's going to be a lot more Nintendo Switch 2 content here on the channel, Lord willing. Lots more games to cover, review, gameplay, guides, walkthroughs, tutorials, you name it, we got it. So stick around. Let me know if you have any questions, and let me know if you picked this thing up yet. If so, what do you think? And if you haven't, what are you waiting for? Maybe you're waiting for stock. But Nintendo actually has been restocking this pretty quick, so keep checking with your local retailers. You should be able to get one in no time. Thanks for watching. Till the next one, my friends. Game on. See you guys later.